Storytelling is something we all do every day. From the very beginning, the who, what, when, where, why, and how of life became history as ancient journalists began writing it all down. Bards would travel around telling tales from far-off places of great deeds, terrible monsters, and beautiful women. Hello, I'm Brad Grass and welcome to another edition of Max Magazine, and today's episode is all about, well, what we're doing right now. It's all about storytelling. It's human nature since the beginning of time. It's what we do. I mean, we live life and then we feel the need to express it, to experience it. We need to tell someone about it, whether we're talking about it, we're writing about it, making movies about it. And it could be about real life, or it could be about the big fish that got away. And every time you tell the story, the fish gets bigger and bigger, the lure gets smaller and smaller. Whether it's fact or fiction, it's all about the art of storytelling.
Good afternoon, and thanks for coming. The stories I tell, they're the stories of ordinary people living out their lives. It's how people exchanged ideas and told moral truths and told cautionary tales.
Well, I grew up in the wood box at home because that's where people threw the old newspapers. It was right beside the stove. And when I was 3 or 4, I already knew how to read. So I'd climb into the wood box and sit there picking out words out of the old newspapers. Headed to Toronto when I was 16, pushing 17 to take journalism, but got caught in the evil message of the day, which is that writers only came from London, England, or Los Angeles, California, or New York, or maybe Toronto, but certainly not from Leslie, Saskatchewan. And then I discovered the old Icelandic fairy tales, the 800-year-old ones.
Of course, before Christmas, you have to have the house absolutely immaculate. And the housewife was sweeping and tidying up, and the family of spiders ran for their lives, climbed the wall, and hid in the attic. However, the spiders were curious about what was going on. And Christmas Eve, after everybody went to bed, they came out of their spidey hole and they climbed down, and they saw this tree, and to their eyes it was just beautiful. And they climbed all through it, up and down the branches, from the bottom to the very top, out to the very tips of all the branches. Well, of course, in their traveling, they had left cobwebs all over the Christmas tree. In one version of the story, it was the first rays of sunlight on Christmas morn. In another version, it was Father Christmas. And in another version, it was the Christ child himself who came and touched that tree. And all those cobwebs turned to gold and to silver. And that, in fact, is why we hang tinsel.
How would I define storytelling? It's a way of letting people use their imagination. The equivalent that I grew up with was CBC Radio, where they had all the plays and all the kids' programs and everything, and you had to imagine everything. The reason I wanted the old ones was because if a story's been around for 1,000 years, or my Persian story, 6,000 years, it's got to have a truth in it. It's got to have a message in it that is universal and that is timeless. And I wanted to get them right. And it was in trying to get them right that I learned that there are all sorts of variations to what we call our stories. We think of Cinderella as our story, Cinderella and the Glass Slipper and the Prince. The actual original version of that was Chinese. And that's why the tiny feet were so important. Remember the bound feet.
You have to think when you're listening to Icelandic stories that the men were either drowning themselves at sea fishing, or they were going a Viking and getting themselves killed. So the women had to be strong, and in Icelandic fairy tales, there are no helpless blonde bimbos wringing their hands, waiting for some guy to save them from the dragon. They have to be out there doing it themselves.
It's a human thing. It's a need we have. It's something that belongs not just to one little group of people, but to several groups of people. They've all got the same germ. And isn't there a message in there that in spite of the wars and the battles and killing each other over loaves of bread, we're all very much alike?
And now all fairy tales are supposed to end, as you know, and they all lived happily ever after? Well, in this case, all I will guarantee is that Hulda very definitely lived happily ever after.
So maybe you loved the interview material, you felt it brought the characters to life, but sometimes it was wordy and you got lost and you couldn't follow the prose. So that's the sort of thing that I think it's useful to hear from your peers.
For some people, storytelling becomes a career or a road to one. Here at the University of Regina School of Journalism, students learn to find the truth, document the truth, and share it with the world in a variety of traditional and modern ways. Joining us today is Mitch Diamantopoulos, who's the head of the Department for Journalism at the University of Regina. Thanks a lot for allowing us to sneak in your class today.
Glad to have you.
So in this particular class, what is it that you focus on with your students regarding journalism?
Yeah, well, this is a topics class, which means we take up contemporary issues in journalism. So that's a wide range of issues, from propaganda, how to identify it, how to decode it, how to deal with it, to public relations. So the press is kind of the eyes and ears for the public on things they can't see or hear directly themselves, and so we try to make sure that our guys have the best tools conceptually as well as technically that they can get.
Yeah, this new generation that's growing up, they have instant access to what's happening all over the world all the time.
That is both a blessing and a curse, and the expectations of the public for instant news are incredible. So the rush to be first rather than be right is really disabling. Journalists practice a democratic craft, so it's important for them in newsrooms to be able to express themselves clearly, get to the point, straight to the reason the public should care about a particular issue.
It's much more than the who, what, where, when, and whys now. It's much more involved. And it's also much more about the art of storytelling.
I'm Wes Funk. I was raised in rural Saskatchewan near North Battleford. Started writing as a little tyke and never grew out of it, and wanted to grow up and be an author, and I did it, so pretty happy these days. West Side Story happened accidentally. I was just writing little bits of my autobiography just for fun and realized I had written my whole life story. Talked to my publisher in Regina about it, and she said, well, let's publish it. Let's get it out there. Let's see if we can get a grant. And it all came together magically. It was awesome. I grew up with very little self-esteem. I was an awkward, overweight, geeky kid who the other boys were outside playing hockey and hunting while I was inside listening to Duran Duran and reading comic books. And I was always kind of an outsider. And so that is, of course, a big theme in the book. And I shelved writing for quite a while in my 20s. I got quite fixated on making an income, having a day job. And then when I hit my early 30s, I had a meltdown. And, well, this is gonna sound crazy, but I was standing in Tramp's record store one day and I was staring at a poster of Jim Morrison, and I don't know what happened there, but it was my hair on my arms stood up and I got goosebumps. It was like Jim was talking to me from the poster and telling me to go home and write a book. At a very young age, I began to realize I was gay. The initial moment of understanding is still clear in my mind. I was with my family on a train trip to Vancouver. I was 6 years old. We were in the dining car standing in line at the counter. While everyone was trying to decide what they wanted to eat, a striking dark-haired young man entered the car. He patted me on the head, pinched my cheeks, and told me I was a cute little boy before he headed off to join his pals for lunch. I watched him walk away thinking he was the most beautiful creature I'd ever laid eyes on. I wanted to go have lunch with him and his friends instead of my family. Truthfully, I didn't even want his friends there. I didn't want to share him. That was my first crush. I appreciate books that are quite blunt and don't mince words, and so I think that's what's inspired me with my writing. I just don't feel the need to sugarcoat things. Some family members had read the book before it was published, so I got their approval. It was very difficult to find that balance, not to spill anyone else's garbage along with my own. "What do you like to do to pass the time?" the nurse asked as she took my temperature and listened to my heartbeat. My dad answered quickly, "He likes to read." "We have a small resource room," the RN cheerfully replied. "Not much there for kids' books, though." "He reads adult books," my dad said with a big smile. The nurse headed out the door and returned a few minutes later with a stack of paperbacks. On the top of the pile was the Amityville Horror, a controversial novel at the time. Suddenly, I wasn't so traumatized. I was going to lie in nice clean sheets for the next several days, away from my annoying siblings. I would get to miss school, receive 3 squares a day, and to top it off, I could lie around reading a book I knew my mother would frown on me reading at home. Memoir writing to me was huge. It was almost overwhelming at times, trying to tell a story, trying to be true to oneself without sounding bitter or angry or volatile. So that was a big project for me. Fiction writing has its challenges too, for a writer to keep the timeline correct and to keep the language in tune with the times. And there's a lot of research involved in fiction writing that I don't think novelists always get proper appreciation for. But nonfiction was a whole other ballgame for me. I'm happy to return to novel writing, really.
When most people hear the phrase storytelling, they think of novels, Grimm and Mother Goose. They think of news, papers, magazines, books, illustrations. Education has opened many doors and keeps opening doors for knowledge and imagination. Joining us now is Trish Elliott, Assistant Professor of Journalism here at the University of Regina. We're moving now, covering all angles of storytelling, Trish, we're moving from the ethical end of it to a much more hands-on approach. You actually have your students create this magazine, which you can find all about in the community, coffee shops here on campus. What's this all about? What's your process with the kids?
We consider it a serious magazine. The students take on some pretty tough projects. It's a full semester of working on the stories. We focus a lot on techniques of storytelling. Basically, how do you craft a story in a way that has a great story arc, that has compelling characters, that's highly descriptive, and really grabs people. And that's what the Crow magazine is all about. And we're really proud of it. The students work so hard on it. Crow magazine, just one of many projects that you guys put together. This is worth checking out. Next time you're at your favorite coffee shop, pick up a copy. I mean, I can't think of a better way to illustrate the art of storytelling. Proper research and reporting it correctly can be very challenging, or it can trigger some sort of made-up fictional account that turns into a novel for your reading pleasure.
I'm Curtis Anderson. I'm born and raised right here in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, and I guess I'm the newest local author. I wrote Gina French's Not a Waste of Roofies, which was picked up and published by Kraken Press in Gothenburg, Sweden. I wanted to make the Gina French character really strong and really independent, but also, you know, flawed, which describes most people. Gina French is a correctional officer who prides herself on coming across as a young, independent, stronger-than-nails woman, and then she actually finds herself physically assaulted. She didn't exactly get the amount of sympathy she expected for being a victim of assault, and it causes her to really change the way she thinks about herself, and she wants to ensure that her daughter has a better life than she does. A road sign warned her of an upcoming exit and listed all its possible destinations. Lake Teamer was second from the top. The car became claustrophobic and unusually bright. Gina drove past the exit and pulled onto the shoulder. She killed the engine, popped the seatbelt, and turned 180 degrees, knelt on her seat, and stared at the back of the large highway sign. The lightning momentarily shone a spotlight on the turnoff, the sign, the exit, the immediate future, and an estimated 52.5 hours of arrogance and self-built bravado drained from her now shaking body. Tears violently streamed down her face as she shook. From the cold, from the fear. She pulled the gun from her waist and held it with both hands, waiting for another adrenaline boost which never came. "You're gonna die up there." Gina began to sweat. She closed her eyes and tried to breathe as she continued squeezing confidence from the revolver. "Nobody knows where you are." Gina was sweating. The crying started suddenly and violently. "Travis has set you up and you're all alone." She reached for the glove box, which harbored 2/3 of her alcoholic travel companion, but she was unable to wrap her fingers around the bottle as her nails scraped the rough plastic. "And you're gonna die up there." She gave up, rested her head against the steering wheel and let it all in. "I am so afraid." Saliva dripped from her mouth as she heaved and moaned. She let it all out. The fear ate her as the darkness, rain, and noise buried the tiny car parked in the middle of nowhere. "You are going to die." The snap of the thunder timed itself perfectly, drowning out the raw screams of a terrified little girl. She's very much a lightning rod. Everybody who interacts with her gets changed, for the better or for worse. Maybe better at first, it'll turn out for the worse later, but she's a very captivating, charismatic character that people are drawn to. She also brings out the worst in people. Anybody can write a story. Is it a story anyone else wants to hear? That's the challenge. And that was the challenge going into this. Slap a really dark, disturbing title on a book, people are gonna be curious, but you need the hook. You need the hook right at the beginning, or they're gonna walk away.
Remember the rule of thirds? I see a lot of empty space in some of the interviews. And I see a lot of wide shots for interviews as well. It would really enhance your work and make it easier for you if you go in tighter. So I can move my funny little stick man so that he's more like this. His eyes are here. And now I don't have as much space.
The five senses can be a very effective tool in storytelling. In the past, the viewer could see the storyteller, hear the words, feel the reactions of the people around them, and of course, think about all that they experienced with that story afterward. Illustration could tell stories to non-readers. This eventually turned into photography, and the effect of seeing images that were real drove the story home much further than it ever had before.
Hello, my name is Berny Hi. I'm the artist in residence at the Saskatchewan Film Pool Cooperative, and we're running for the next year, we're running the Great Saskatchewan Time Lapse. So come on in, come meet some of the artists involved and see our new studio here called The Vault. My very first attempts at filmmaking was with my dad's VHS camera, and me and my friends would get together and do little films. Usually it would be a remake of popular Hollywood films. So we would do Star Wars or Indiana Jones. And then when I got to York University and took the film program there, I was introduced to art filmmaking.
Barely recognized as might be on a couple of old buildings or an empty grass field.
That's where I really started to head in that direction of creating art films or just personal films that I was hoping to get a message across with. Storytelling to me is a personal expression of an idea or a feeling that you want to get across to someone else. I believe that if you put emotion or intent into your work, that you hope that it kind of jives with the audience's emotions and they feel something and they get something from that experience. The end product film will be comprised of component films made by individuals or these community groups. So each group or individual will be responsible for 30 seconds to 2 minutes of the whole story, and we'll put those all together as the end product, which will be about a 30 to 40 minute film. We're going to be shooting it vertically, so like this rather than like this, so that we can project it onto a freestanding structure in the shape of our province.
I'm a little nervous, actually. After watching some of the demo material from Bernie, I think it's going to be a little bit of a challenge because Saskatchewan is horizontal in its landscape. We're usually always working with a horizontal plane. So it's almost reorganizing the brain a bit in terms of how to structure something, but then I think it's also going to be a learning process in how we read it as well.
The project I will be involved with is a historical-based piece about the formation of the Qu'Appelle Valley. The techniques I'll be utilizing for this particular story is kind of going to be a mix of things. It's going to utilize things such as miniatures and computer effects, but it's also going to really blur some lines between a traditional, like actual video clips and mixed with stills, and they're going to be animated as well.
I'm excited to work with a bunch of industry professionals, but also first-time amateur filmmakers as well, and kind of take that knowledge that I've learned in the classroom and take it to an outside setting and apply that to real life, I guess, and kind of just start the career for my own.
As a First Nations person in Saskatchewan, I wasn't seeing stories from my community reflected back in mainstream media. So I felt like there were so many stories that could be told that weren't being told, and I felt like I could bring that to, a mainstream audience.
It just seems like a great opportunity for a lot of different filmmakers, like just meeting people tonight from different levels of experience, from very fresh to people who have been doing film for dozens of years. That to put it all together with the subject matter, I think will be something really exciting.
In total, right now, we have 28 artists that have applied and will be partaking in this experiment adventure. For this particular program, the Great Saskatchewan Time Lapse, I'm hoping that people take away a sense of pride from being a Saskatchewanian. So, like I said, we're going to be seeing stories from Ice Age, but we'll also see some First Nations peoples coming into the land, having their own culture and their own time here in the province, as well the kind of cultural landscape that we have nowadays. And what I'm hoping that people see is that our lives and our stories are valuable, and that this is who we are, that there's been a long, grand story here in the province.
Mark Taylor, you're a lab instructor here at U of R in the journalism program. You work very closely with Trish, but you mentioned something to me. There's a program that really sets the U of R apart from any other school, and what's that?
It's our internship program. Every student that's accepted into the school, in order to graduate, they have to complete an internship. All of our internships are paid, and all of them are a minimum of 13 weeks. The bright folks who set up this school, that's how they set it up and insisted that it be paid. We always say that our internships they're like a 13-week job interview. So a lot of the students, if you do well, which most of them do, they end up turns into a job. So.
Constantly evolving are the stories of the human condition. An endless mission to tell the tales of old, the now, and possible future. To seek out new technology and boldly tell what no one has told before.
There's a king who has 3 sons, and he sends them off one at a time to find a mate. So the first one's traveling along on his horse, and he hears the most beautiful music he's ever heard. And he stopped and said, "Who is singing this beautiful song?" And the man said, "That's the king's daughter." And he said, "Well, that's the woman I want to marry." And he went to meet her, but she was a frog. And he went, "Ugh, frog," and galloped off. The second son came along. He heard again this beautiful, beautiful song that sounded like all the angels in heaven singing. And he thought, "I've got to find out who has that voice." And then he saw it was a frog. And he snorted and he left. Well, the third son, the young one, came along. And again, he heard the wonderful song. And the prince met the frog. And the king said, "You don't want her, right?" And he said, "I would take her just for her beautiful, beautiful voice." So they were married. 3 men were returning home with their brides, and the third son came along and they barred the gates and said, "Frogs don't come in here." And he looked at the soldiers and said, "If my frog bride can't come in here, I don't come in either." And that's when the spell was broken, that the evil magician had put on the beautiful princess when she was young. The king looked at his son and said, "Son, you're the one who chose most wisely. I will make you and your bride heirs of the kingdom when I die."
If you have program ideas that you'd like to see on maxTV Local On Demand, write us at max.local@sasktel.com. maxTV programming is now available on maxTV on the go at maxtvonthego.sasktel.com.